Good evening. My name is Kevin Bergeson, and I am the Programs Manager with the Colon Cancer Alliance. And I want to welcome you all to tonight's webinar, What Can I Eat After Colorectal Cancer? Brought to you this evening in part by Lilly Oncology. A healthy diet can help reduce your risk for cancer, but a colorectal cancer diagnosis often raises a new set of questions on proper diet and oncological nutrition. Tonight, our guest speaker will answer these questions and more. You will also be able to submit written questions on specific dietary issues during our Q&A session. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and all registrants and attendees will receive a link to where we have posted the webinar of the recording. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that neither the Colon Cancer Alliance nor our presenter are giving medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is intended or established. You should always seek in-person medical advice and make medical decisions together with your individual clinician team. I'd like to remind everybody that this webinar was brought to you this evening in part by Lilly Oncology. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce our expert speaker for this evening, Terri Taylor. Terri is a registered dietitian and board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition from Virginia G. Piper Cancer Center at HonorHealth in Scottsdale, Arizona. She is a graduate of Arizona State University and has completed a Presbyterian Hospital Dallas dietetic internship. Terri is a nutrition educator for the Virginia G. Piper Cancer Center, and her practice includes individual nutrition counseling, nutrition and cooking classes, as well as community speaking engagements. Her passion is translating the science of nutrition into practical everyday habits for cancer prevention and survivorship. And with that, Terri, I'm going to turn presentation over to you, and welcome to the webinar, Terri.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I want to really thank you and the Colon Cancer Alliance for all of your help with coordinating this event. And I am so excited to reach out to so many survivors all across the country. Some of them I think I know from meeting them at the Colon Cancer Alliance meeting here last year and from other acquaintances I've made. But I really want to be able to share some things about nutrition with you. And we already have a common bond, and that's our passion and interest in nutrition. So tonight, we're going to talk about what you should eat after a colorectal cancer diagnosis. So let's get started. So today, my hope is that we will cover these 4 topics. One would be describing the benefits of nutrition with colorectal cancer survivorship, reviewing proactive symptom management strategies, discussing nutritional guidelines to reduce the risk of recurrence, mortality, and to optimize your health, and to help you incorporate these ideas into your lifestyle. We are all in different points in terms of our treatment and survivorship, so hopefully we'll be able to touch on something that will be of interest to all of you. One thing that we look at when we look at oncology care is really focusing on quality of life. That is a huge measure of part of our treatment when we look in oncology. And so there's a quality of life model for cancer survivorship, which you can see, and it has 4 pillars. One of those is physical well-being, another is social well-being, psychological well-being, and spiritual well-being. And I did, on this slide, highlight the ones in red that I felt were most related to nutrition. So you can see that nutrition plays a role in all aspects of cancer survivorship. Going beyond that, when we look at some of the potential treatment side effects with colorectal cancer, you are probably well aware of many of these. And many of these were shown on the first slide that showed the model for cancer survivorship. So we have things like bowel irregularities and weight changes and low blood counts and fatigue, taste changes, mouth sores, loss of appetite. All of those are physical well-being issues, as well as peripheral neuropathy. But some of the other things that we may not think of that are related to nutrition are lack of control, depression, and fear. So we want to address all of those when we're looking at your nutritional treatment plan and survivorship plan. Interestingly enough, when we survey colorectal cancer survivors, we find out what most of their most recognized treatment symptoms are. And so many of those are listed: bowel control, fatigue, peripheral neuropathy, abnormal blood counts, loss of control, and fear of recurrence. And what we find is that as these symptoms increase, the quality of life decreases. So these are some symptoms that we specifically want to address today. Nutrition can be of big help in all of those side effects. And what I have found in my practice is that when I have clients that are proactively managing their symptoms, they feel better, they feel more in control of their treatment, and they really have a better quality of life. So some of the ways that nutrition can help are to minimize the treatment side effects, increase the efficacy of those treatments, support your immune system and your blood counts, reduce inflammation, which is a trigger for cancer cell growth, help retard cancer progression, decrease the risk of recurrence, other cancers, and other chronic diseases. We do know that colorectal cancer survivors do have many comorbid health conditions, so we don't want to forget about those. Provide some control, promote general well-being, and create your new normal. Very important to recognize, though, that one size does not fit all when it comes to colorectal cancer survivorship. I would invite you tonight to really think about what works for you. And I'm going to give you some options on how to modify your eating pattern to minimize side effects that you may be experiencing. And I really encourage my clients to be proactive, working with your treatment to optimize your quality of life, implementing things that can help minimize those side effects so that you can feel better. Thinking about, after you complete your treatment, what am I going to do to stay healthy? These are all areas where you can play a big part of them. And of course, by being more proactive, you are also accepting some responsibility for the control and being part of your care team. And you are the most important part of that care team. So in order to understand how nutrition can really help with cancer treatment and survivorship, I think it's important to take a look at how cancer cells grow. You will find, as we go through these concepts on how cancer cells grow, you will find later that many of the foods we eat act on these same processes to help get rid of cancer cells. So one way that cancer cells grow is through free radicals. And those are very, very highly charged particles that are in our systems that actually can get into the genetics or makeup of cells and turn them into cancer cells. So our goal is to try and get rid of those radicals through treatments and through lifestyle choices. Of course, there are some genetic changes that can make cancer cells grow. Hormones play an integral part in cancer cell growth. One in particular, when we look at colorectal cancer, would be insulin. And people that have higher levels of circulating insulin in their system can have higher levels of other hormones, in particular insulin-like growth factor 2, which can trigger the growth of cancer cells. Other growth factors, as I mentioned, one of them being insulin-like growth factor 2. You may have heard of some of these other ones: VEGF, mTOR, EGFR, and COX-2. These are all growth factors that have been identified that and are implemented with colon cancer cell growth. Many of the newer drugs target these growth factors, and some of the foods that we eat can also target these growth factors. And the ways that they work are through what we call angiogenesis, angio meaning blood, and genesis meaning birth. So they establish cascades of blood vessels that feed cancer cells. So they provide nourishment and get rid of their waste, so they keep growing and growing and growing. So when we look at cancer treatment, some of the newer drugs are what we call anti-angiogenesis. They cut off those blood supplies so cancer cells can no longer be fed and get rid of their waste, so they die. Chronic inflammation is a seed for cancer cell growth, and that is really when the immune system goes on overdrive, kind of like the Energizer Bunny, and it keeps submitting or creating hormones that, again, could fuel the growth of cancer cells. And as I mentioned, insulin resistance, having higher levels of insulin in the blood, connecting with hormones like insulin-like growth factor to promote cancer cell growth. And as I mentioned, inflammation is related to immune system disruptions. Initially, through research, we thought that cancer cells were where we should be looking in research to figure out how to treat cancer. So we were looking specifically at the tumor cells themselves. But now what we're finding, it's really the environment around the tumor cell that is probably most influential. And you will see I have circled some of those growth factors that I just mentioned to you: VEGF, EGF, insulin-like growth factor, COX-2, mTOR. You see the word angiogenesis, again, those blood vessels feeding cancer cells. So what we look at now is how can we target the neighbors or the environment around that tumor to make that cancer cell growth stop and to eventually get rid of them. So many of our lifestyle choices can affect this environment around the colon cancer cells and all cancer cells that we call the microenvironment. Here are some examples of some of the lifestyle choices that can affect that microenvironment. I mentioned to you inflammation being a fuel for cancer cell growth, and what we have found that excess body fat, intake of red meat and processed fats, and alcohol all increase inflammation in the body to potentially trigger cancer cell growth. And on the flip side, eating more plant foods, including probiotics, omega-3 fats, and being active can decrease that inflammation. We talked about those highly charged particles, the free radicals, and the genetic changes they can make in cells. Red meat and alcohol, again, can increase the production of those free radicals and genetic damage, whereas plant foods act to bind those free radicals to prevent some of that genetic damage. Another area that we just looked at were growth factors and their ability to create those blood vessels to feed the cancer cells. Some of the things in our lifestyle that act to stimulate those growth factors and angiogenesis are, again, excess body fat, red meats, and refined or white flour types of carbohydrates. Things that can cut off those blood supplies, bind some of those growth factors and hormones to reduce cancer cell growth are plant foods, probiotics, complex or slow absorbing carbohydrates, and exercise, or what we would call activity or movement. So you can see that the lifestyle choices that you make can have an influence on developing colon cancer, can have an influence on survivorship and recurrence rates. And also, I like to think of the idea that as we're doing treatment, if we can create an environment that is working to get rid of cancer cells through our lifestyle choices and treatment, that is the best option. So let's take a look at those plant foods. And why do we hear so much about plant foods, and why are they so important? Plant foods have in them what we call phytochemicals. So phyto means plant, and they are not chemicals. They are naturally found compounds in plant foods that act in many ways. As we saw before, they help to reduce inflammation, get rid of some of those growth factors, and in turn can stop the growth or progression of cancer cells. Another part of plant foods would be fiber, and we'll talk in depth about that in a minute. Some of the vitamins, in particular some of the B vitamins, minerals like calcium and selenium. And when we're looking at survivorship and perhaps maintaining a healthy weight, we know that plant foods can give us a lot of nutrition for a small amount of calories. So those phytochemicals, as I mentioned, are found naturally just in plant foods. And when you look at all those beautiful plant foods and you see those colors, you see the red in the raspberries, you see the orange in the oranges, the green in the kiwi, those are actually the phytochemicals in those plant foods. Some of the acts that they do, some of the ways that they act is that they regulate the production of certain hormones. They boost the production of certain enzymes that can actually get rid of carcinogens or cancer-causing substances. They can repair some of the genetic damage. They can act as antioxidants to actually bind those free radicals and take them out of our systems. Phytochemicals can reduce inflammation. They can stop the blood flow of cancer cells, what we call that angiogenesis. And phytochemicals play a large role in supporting the immune system. There are thousands of phytochemicals that we have found, and probably thousands more that we will find through research. But some that are particularly important when we look at colorectal cancer would be polyphenols. And these are signified by their red, purple, and blue colorings. So you can see there are many choices there. And the good thing is that, number one, if there are foods that you like and don't like, you can pick and choose to get the polyphenols. And also you can choose the ones and in the form that you best tolerate during your treatment or after a surgery. Polyphenols in particular act to reduce inflammation. One thing I do want to point out, and we will talk about this in a few minutes as well, but curcumin, the culinary spice, is listed on here as a polyphenol. And there has been a lot of research looking at turmeric, which is related to curcumin and its role in colorectal cancer prevention and survivorship. Another group of phytochemicals that are very important when we look at colorectal cancer are the glucosinolates, which come from your cabbage family vegetables. Again, we can modify these types of vegetables so that they are better tolerated if you're experiencing some gastrointestinal symptoms from surgery or treatments. Another group would be the carotenoids. And the carotenoids are all of your orange, yellow fruits and vegetables and dark green vegetables. Carotenoids in particular are very important in supporting the immune system. And when we speak of the immune system when you're going through colorectal cancer treatment, we're specifically looking at white blood cells or absolute neutrophil count. And of course, those white blood cells are the ones that help prevent infection. So we want to try and keep those as high as we can within the normal range. So some of these foods can help to support your immune system. Aside from phytochemicals, we have fiber in your plant foods. And I know for many of you this is a very touchy subject because you know that it's important to eat plant foods, but it may be difficult for you to digest or absorb some of them. So fiber is the indigestible part of plant foods, but there are different types of fiber. There is soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. And those types of fibers play different roles in bowel management. Sources of fiber would come from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and nuts and seeds. The way that fiber does work to provide some protection is that it does bind some of those hormones. It helps to feed the food through the bowel so that there may not be as much interaction with certain cancer-causing compounds in the lining of the colon. The type of fiber that you choose can help to manage bowel regularity. Fiber actually acts to convert some short-chain fatty acids that we call butyrate to stop the growth of colon cancer cell growth. Fiber reduces inflammation in some of those growth factors. It helps to repair some damaged genes. And we're looking at survivorship and the role of maintaining a healthy weight. Fiber can be important. But I think it's important now to take a minute and talk about regulating bowel and what some of the bowel issues may be after having a colorectal surgery or while undergoing colorectal cancer treatment. Some people will experience constipation, especially if they are taking some pain medicines, maybe not being as active. So the goal when constipation is an issue is to focus on the type of fiber called insoluble fiber. And insoluble fiber is the type that stimulates your bowel to work. Some examples of insoluble fiber would be wheat bran, other whole grains, berries and fresh fruits with peels like the peeling on an apple or a pear, raw vegetables, perhaps not using some of the gassy ones, and nuts and of course seeds if tolerated. So these would be the types of fiber, the insoluble fiber, that you would want to focus on if you were experiencing constipation. Eating more of this fiber does require drinking more fluid, though, because the fiber will bind the fluid in your system to push the food through, and if you don't have enough fluid in your system, if you're dehydrated, it really won't work. So pushing fluids is very important. If these products don't work or they aren't items that you can tolerate, there is a product that I recommend routinely called Smooth Move Tea, which is a psyllium-based tea that can help with constipation. And of course, our old standby, the warm prune juice. Also, doing some physical activity does help to stimulate your gastrointestinal system and pushing it to work. Now, on the other side of the coin, there are, of course, many issues with colorectal cancer treatment, be it certain chemotherapy drugs like 5-fluorouracil or radiation treatment, or perhaps a surgery where you have lost some of the part of your bowel, where diarrhea and bowel urgency become a major concern. As I mentioned before, there are types of fiber, in particular soluble fiber, that helps to actually bind the fluid in the bowel to minimize some diarrhea and bowel urgency. Some examples of soluble fiber would be oat products, so it could be oatmeal and oat bread, Cheerio cereal, applesauce, bananas, peaches, oranges, carrots, lentils, and psyllium are all examples of soluble fiber that can actually be helpful in reducing some diarrhea. If you're experiencing a lot of bowel urgency, it often helps to get a psyllium fiber powder supplement. Take 1 teaspoon in 2 ounces of water after each meal and avoid other fluids for an hour, and that can really help to minimize that bowel urgency. In addition to focusing on soluble fiber, some other things that can be helpful if you're experiencing diarrhea and bowel urgency is to minimize insoluble fiber. So what that means is using cooked, not raw vegetables, not using nuts, seeds, corn, peas, and some of your cabbage family vegetables, especially if you're experiencing a lot of gas. In choosing your fruits, aside from the applesauce, banana, peaches, and oranges, using peeled apples, peeled pears, or cooked and canned fruits. Something that I found that's been very helpful for managing diarrhea and bowel urgency is rice congee. Rice congee is a soupy rice mixture where you take 1 cup of long grain white rice, not quick or minute rice, but actual white rice. You cook it with 6 to 7 cups of water with some salt or broth. You cook it on the stove for about 40 minutes, and it does make a soupy rice mixture. And that rice congee, if you take about half a cup per day, can really help minimize diarrhea and bowel urgency. Some people might experience some lactose intolerance, so exploring that, maybe not using some of your regular dairy, using low lactose products, and including some probiotics such as yogurt or kefir in foods, or a probiotic supplement. Sugar alcohols such as sorbitol, which are used in many low carbohydrate products, are known to stimulate diarrhea. Just like when we are dealing with constipation, it is very important that you are pushing extra fluids to replace any fluids and or electrolytes like potassium and sodium that you may be losing by having a lot of diarrhea or a lot of output. When using those fluids, carbonation can contribute to bowel upset, so I would use ones that don't have a lot of carbonation or let that go a little bit flat before you use it. And of course, there are many anti-gas products available over the counter, things like Gas-X and Phazyme. There are anti-diarrhea products that your physician may prescribe. And another thing would be L-Glutamine, which is actually an amino acid and a supplemental product that can be used for managing diarrhea and also for peripheral neuropathy and for your immune system. In surveying many colorectal cancer survivors, these are some of the eating behaviors that they felt were most helpful for dealing with bowel urgency and diarrhea. Not to overeat, just to eat until you are full, smaller meals and chew your food slowly, perhaps not using as many restaurant foods, or if you are going to a restaurant, think about looking at the menu ahead of time to make choices, and of course asking your server questions about what's actually in those foods as they're being prepared. When you go out, to make sure you know where the closest bathroom is so that you are prepared. If you do have an ostomy, to do some irrigation prior to eating. And not doing strenuous exercise like running, because that can actually cause a little bit more bowel urgency. So as you can see, we know the benefits of plant foods in reducing colorectal cancer risk and in helping with survivorship and reducing recurrence. So I really want to make sure that you understand that you can eat plant foods, but it's adjusting it to the way that your body can tolerate it. The goal is to have half of your plate with fruits and vegetables, 1/4 with whole grains, and the additional from protein. Again, adjusting those choices to your tolerance. You don't need to eat raw vegetables to get the benefits of the phytochemicals from these plant foods. You can just as well steam them or roast them or grill them. You can use frozen and canned. You could drink 100% fruit juice if you really have a problem tolerating fiber. And remembering that sometimes if these issues are related to a treatment that has ended, to again try to reintroduce them slowly moving forward, see if you can adjust to eating them or not. So being open to trying them again. Aside from plant foods, protein is very important when we look at colorectal cancer treatment. Some things that protein does is that it helps stabilize the blood sugar. When combined with some of those fruits and vegetables and other grains, it helps to keep the blood sugar more even, so you won't have as much insulin and connection with that insulin-like growth factor to promote the growth of cancer cells. Protein is very important for rebuilding tissues, perhaps after a surgery, for maintaining muscle mass throughout treatment and beyond. It does give you better energy when you combine protein with carbohydrate together, because your blood sugar is a little bit more even. And also, protein is a foundation of the immune system. And as I mentioned, we are particularly concerned about your white blood cell count during treatment. So including protein, along with those carotenoids, those yellow, orange fruits and vegetables and dark green vegetables, can be important for your immune system. In looking at proteins, we do specifically need to address red and processed meats and colorectal cancer. As you can see, some research has associated eating at or above the medium of red and processed meat before and after colorectal cancer diagnosis with a 79% higher risk of colorectal cancer-associated mortality. So again, in choosing proteins, we want to make sure that you are getting a wide variety. It doesn't mean not eating any red meat, but including it as part of other types of proteins that you're eating. Another research study attributed a high Western diet pattern, what we might call the standard American diet, that includes red and processed meats, more white or refined grains, and sweets and desserts, finding that there was a higher risk of recurrence and mortality with stage 3 colon cancer after it was treated with surgery and adjuvant chemotherapy if this type of diet pattern was followed. So again, it just shows us that especially after treatment, we want to be looking at what we're using for our proteins. The reason that red meat and processed meat would mean meats that are smoked, cured, salted, or may have additional chemical preservatives like nitrates and nitrites. In these types of meats, there are certain types of compounds that we call nitrosamines and N-nitroso compounds. They are actually formed in the gut from the exposure to nitrates and nitrites that might be in some of your processed meats. Or red meat has a type of iron called heme iron that, when it comes in contact with the gut, creates these nitrosamines. And these nitrosamines can create inflammation and damage the gut lining and create those free radicals that we know are associated with cancer cell growth. Luckily, and very interestingly enough, now many of our stores carry uncured products that do not have nitrates and nitrites in them. There are uncured chicken hot dogs, there are uncured broths, many ways that you can work around them so you can still enjoy these products, but do it in a way that might be more safe. Another issue with red meats, and actually all animal products, when they are grilled or heated, cooked at a high temperature, like in pan frying, that process of grilling or high heat pan frying creates certain compounds, what we call heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which can be cancer causing. So it's best when cooking any type of animal product to go ahead and actually marinate it first, or put a dry rub of herbs on it, or do slower and longer cooking to reduce that cancer risk by about 90% from grilling. So we know the importance of protein, but there are many different protein sources. Some other items could be skinned poultry, wild fish. When we look at lean red meat, again, we're not saying not to eat any red meat. The American Institute for Cancer Research says a threshold up to 18 ounces cooked per week, which would include beef, veal, lamb, and pork, would be acceptable, but to try and minimize those cured, smoked, and processed meats. And again, you can buy uncured meats that don't have nitrates and nitrites. Some other options would be dairy, or if you are having diarrhea and need to use some low lactose products, a lactate milk or low lactose milk would be appropriate. Your almond milk, rice milk, coconut milks, they are not protein sources unless they have protein added to them. Eggs, if you can tolerate them, your beans, hummus and quinoa, nut butters like peanut butter and almond butter, protein powders, and organic soy. And in order for your body to absorb and use proteins best, they should be divided throughout the day. Rather than doing it all at once, space it out in 3 to 4 feedings per day with a maximum of about 30 grams of protein per serving. Dairy often comes up when we look at cancer in general, and in particular we look at colorectal cancer. We spoke earlier about the effects of the lactose in some dairy that may be an item that you cannot tolerate, but we do know that higher intakes of total calcium and milk after a colorectal cancer diagnosis is associated with lower risk of all-cause mortality. And higher total calcium was inversely associated with colorectal cancer-specific mortality. So we do want to think about how can we get some calcium from our foods. If you can tolerate milk, that might be an option for you. If not, again, a lactate milk, a fortified milk alternative such as almond, coconut, or soy milk that has calcium and vitamin D added to it. Soy milk would have protein and would be low in lactose. Some natural cheeses are actually low in lactose as well, not your processed slices, but regular natural cheeses, and yogurts. When we looked at those protein sources, we did see, again, wild fish as a choice. And so it's really important to be taking a look at fish and colorectal cancer. A lot of research in this area and very exciting research. One thing we do know, and this is just looking at general, that what we call pescatarian eating, and that is actually vegetarians that also eat fish, has been associated with lower incidence of colorectal cancer. You can see by 49%. Some of those other types of vegetarian diets, ones that include milk and eggs like lacto-ovo, 18% decrease in risk. Vegan, where they are not eating any animal products, 16%. Overall risk, 22% lower with vegetarian diets. But the main thing I want to point out here is the pescatarian type of diet, where it did include the fish, had the biggest impact on decreasing the risk of colorectal cancer. And although we're looking at prevention, we can't negate the fact that perhaps some of the things that we do to prevent colorectal cancer can also be helpful in lowering the risk of recurrence. So let's look at omega-3 fats, which comes from fatty fish and other types of products, and see their effects on colon cancer itself. We're talking about colon cancer treatment and survivorship. There was a study that actually found that using some omega-3 fat during cancer treatment with FOLFOX or FOLFIRI chemotherapy in the lab showed that it did enhance the effect. It made it work better. We've also seen some studies that show that including omega-3 fat or that fatty fat fish and other omega-3 sources helps stop some of the cancer-related muscle wasting that we can see. Omega-3 fats, again, act as anti-angiogenesis. They cut off the blood supply to cancer cells. They are anti-inflammatory. Some main sources would be wild fatty fish, such as salmon or trout or Arctic char or black cod or low mercury tuna, grass-fed meat, ground flaxseed, chia and hemp seeds, and walnuts. And actually there's been some specific research done in walnuts and their positive effects on lowering colorectal cancer risk and increasing and improving survivorship. Very interesting study that just came out in June of this year that looked at marine omega-3 fat. So this is the type that comes from fatty fish, not from the flaxseed and the chia and the hemp seeds. But it was found that a higher intake of the types of omega-3 fats that are in this type of fish after a colorectal cancer diagnosis was associated with a lower risk of colorectal cancer specific mortality. Not all cause, but colorectal cancer specific. And the comparison was 0.3 grams per day of marine omega-3 fat versus less than 0.1 gram. And those that increased their intake of marine omega-3 fat by 0.15 grams per day after their diagnosis had a lower rate of colorectal cancer mortality compared to people that didn't include any or didn't make any change. These numbers really don't make a lot of impact until you look at how much is in certain foods. So 0.3 grams per day is very, very low. If we look at some fish and we look at a 3-ounce serving, you can see most of the fish listed here, the black cod, herring, salmon, sardines, are all about 1.1 to 1.5 grams per 3 ounces. So when we talk about a 0.3 gram increase of omega-3 fat from marine sources, we're talking about only 3/4 of an ounce, or if it's tuna, 1.5 ounces. So it's very, very small and likely very doable. Another study actually looked at fish oil supplementation after stage 2 colorectal cancer diagnosis and looked at quality of life. And they were looking at 453 newly diagnosed stage 2 colorectal cancer survivors. They interviewed them at their initial diagnosis at 12 and 24 months. And they did find that the people that included fish oil supplementation scored or rated higher their physical functioning on their quality of life surveys. Unfortunately, they did not quantify specifically how much fish oil they were each taking, but it was probably due to less inflammation because of taking the fish oil, so they were better able to be active and do physical types of activities. Taking the fish oil did not affect mortality or recurrence. As you can see, and we talked about earlier, there are some ways to help support your blood counts during treatment. I mentioned to you already the importance of including protein and omega-3 fats and carotenoids for improving your white blood cell counts. Also probiotics, which is the good bacteria, which again you can find in yogurt and kefir, and something called L-Glutamine powder, which again is a building block of proteins and amino acid. For your red blood cells, including some things like high iron foods, could be part of the red meat within the 18 ounces cooked allowance. It could be some fortified cereals. It could be some cooked spinach, some foods with vitamin C, many of your citrus and other fruits and vegetables or potatoes, B vitamin foods, which could be in some of your grains, and platelets. Platelets can often be low as a result of chemotherapy. Eating some dark greens because of their vitamin K helps to increase that platelet level. And in my experience, when I have my clients use toasted sesame oil and combine that with the dark greens and saute it in that, we have had good success with increasing those platelet levels. Some promising supplements when we look at colorectal cancer. Again, fish oil perhaps We looked at that and its effect on physical functioning. If your blood platelet levels are low, you would want to hold fish oil supplements though, because again, they are a blood thinner. So you would want to thin your blood further if your blood platelets were low. If you're concerned about taking fish oil with your treatment, perhaps go ahead and wait for a day before and a few days after and then resume it in between treatments. Vitamin D is a supplement that is a supplement and a blood level that we're looking at a lot in cancer development and survivorship. And we do know that lower levels of serum vitamin D, which we call serum 25-hydroxyvitamin D levels, are associated with higher risk of cancers and other things like Alzheimer's, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, diabetes. So very important to check that level have your physician check it and see if you do require some vitamin D supplementation. This is especially important if you've had bowel surgery and you have short bowel syndrome. We talked about calcium perhaps. We do know that calcium has been shown to reduce some non-cancerous colon polyps. So calcium through foods or supplementation may be a promising supplement to consider. If you have prostate cancer, we would want you to get your calcium from your foods and to minimize the amount from supplements. Probiotics, those good bacteria. Multivitamins, especially if you have short bowel syndrome where you're not absorbing all of your nutrition. Turmeric or curcumin, and again, it can be a blood thinner, so hold that if your platelet levels are low. And L-Glutamine. L-Glutamine, as I mentioned, is a building block of a protein called an amino acid. It has been shown to show some promise with peripheral neuropathy, as well as bowel management and helping your immune system. Typically, what we would suggest is a 30-gram dose that you would take the day before your treatment, the day of, and for 2 to 3 days afterwards. Another supplement that can be helpful with peripheral neuropathy is alpha-lipoic acid, and that again is probably most beneficial after you've completed your treatment if you have some residual peripheral neuropathy from your chemotherapy. A B-complex vitamin, those omega-3 fatty acids from the fatty fish, or if you're vegan, you could use an algae supplement. Some non-nutritional strategies might be acupuncture, laser treatment, or prescription medicines. So let's move forward and talk about survivorship and recurrence. There are some guidelines that we want to address to avoid recurrence and to help with long-term colon cancer survivorship. We want to look at achieving and maintaining a healthy body weight, eating more plant foods in ways that you can tolerate them, limiting those red meats and those processed meats, minimizing alcohol consumption, and being active. One thing that's a little bit concerning to me that we have just found out through some research is that colorectal cancer survivors really have a high rate of obesity moving forward after their treatment. In this survey, which surveyed 538,000 participants of all ages, they found that obesity in cancer survivors, and this is all cancer survivors, increased from 22.4% to 31.7% versus those who didn't have cancer, which had lower rates. And specifically in colorectal cancer survivors, the annual increase was 3.1% in women and 3.7% in men. So in colorectal cancer survivorship, maintaining a healthy weight is very important, especially because we know that obesity and excess body fat can contribute to many of the things that we talked about, increasing those growth hormones, promoting inflammation, creating insulin resistance, things that we know are related to growth of cancer cells. Another thing that was very interesting is that we have found that the incidence of diabetes in colorectal cancer survivors is increasing. And knowing that obesity is a risk factor for diabetes. So in colorectal cancer survivors in this study, 53% higher risk of diabetes for the first year after their diagnosis, and it remained increased by 19% up through the 5th year after their diagnosis. So I really would encourage you to make sure you are being screened and monitored for diabetes with your primary care physicians. In survivorship, then, we're looking at trying to reduce our risk of recurrence, prolonging our survival, and decreasing our risk of mortality of colon cancer and other cancers. And as I mentioned that one study before with the Western diet, we want to make sure that you're using less red and processed meats, fewer white carbohydrates and sugar-sweetened beverages, and being active. And one eating plan that kind of encompasses all of that is what we call the Mediterranean eating plan. And you'll see the foundation of that is eating more plant foods, using some of those healthy oils, eating more fish, using some dairy and eggs, and keeping the sweets and red meat for moderation. Water, of course. And then we will take a look at that alcohol. Many survivors say that it's just too hard to adopt a healthy eating plan because it takes too much work or too much time. And so here are a few things that you can do to make it more simple. Of course, just have a healthy kitchen, have those items on hand so you can create meals very easily. Work smarter, not harder. Use your blender, food processors, graters, a slow cooker. Make things and put them in single-serve bags that you can use later. Use a mason jar to put oatmeal in overnight. Cook once and eat many, many times by batch cooking. Make extra chicken breast or extra soups and freeze them and use them later. If you're going to be chopping foods, either buy them already pre-chopped or do it once and do it for the whole week. And of course, it's very appropriate to use things that are convenient. Frozen produce, pre-cooked grains, canned beans, many items are out there that you can use that are ready to go. Just want to bring up the idea of alcohol and colon cancer. This was one of the issues that many survivors were unaware of, that alcohol is a risk for, of course, colon cancer development and recurrence. And that's because in alcohol, there's a byproduct of alcohol metabolism called acetaldehyde, and that actually can damage the gut lining and promote inflammation and genetic changes, and reduce the effect of a B vitamin and folate to increase colon cancer risk and recurrence. And of course, alcohol is a contributor to calories, which can contribute to that weight gain. And it is a risk factor for many other cancers, in particular esophageal cancer, breast cancers, head and neck cancers. So if you choose to drink, the guidelines are you can have 1 drink serving per day for women, and a standard serving would be 5 ounces of wine, 12 ounces of beer, or 1.5 ounces of distilled alcohol, or 2 servings per day for men. We don't want to forget the idea of being physically active. Those who were more active had a 50% lower risk of recurrence or death than those who were less active. And again, it's working on those hormone levels and controlling weight and body fat, helps your energy and stress, so very important. The goal would be 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity activity, and that can be whatever you enjoy. Maybe it's walking your dog, maybe it's biking, maybe it's swimming, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's going to a class. The big thing is just moving and not sitting in that chair all day, getting up every hour so that you are getting activity, and not forgetting some of those resistance activities, some weight bearing or weight training activities to help with that muscle mass. So very important to understand, and you know this better than anyone else, that it's kind of like riding a roller coaster when you're living with colorectal cancer and any cancers. You have to go with the ups and downs. And what I would encourage you to do is use those survivorship guidelines as your framework, using those healthy foods and modifying those for any treatment symptoms that you are experiencing. And understanding, again, not only being proactive, but knowing that it's within your control to choose how you respond to the ways cancer will change your life. If you are in our area, at the Virginia D. Piper Cancer Center, we do offer individual nutrition counseling, cooking classes. We have exercise and mind-body spirit programs and community events and screenings. So I will be anxious to hear your questions and hopefully give you some guidance. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Terri. I appreciate that. Well done. As always, that is a tremendous wealth of information, and we greatly appreciate that. Your wisdom and your counsel here. We do have some questions that have been coming in, and I'd like to remind everybody that our webinar questions and answer sessions are intended to be interactive, but sound quality issues generally prevent us from offering the opportunity for you as an attendee to ask questions verbally. We do, however, take your written questions using the software included on the GoToWebinar package here. To submit a question, click on the small plus sign located next to the word questions on your control panel that you should be seeing on the right side of your screen. Type your question in and hit enter. If we are unable to get to your question tonight, we will respond to you via email. We're going to do everything we can to answer as many questions as we can in a short amount of time we have left here. But if we don't ask your question, we apologize in advance, but we will get back to you by email. Our first question tonight comes to us from Maureen, and it's a common question. I've got 2 or 3 questions that I've seen so far come in that are very similar to this, Terry. Maureen's a stage 2 survivor, and she is an ostomate, and some of her meds for other health issues have slowed her metabolism, causing her to gain 15 pounds over the last 7 years. And she also has a wide variety of dietary challenges and is struggling because most diet choices for her aren't possible. You touched on some of those during your presentation. Dairy's out, salads are out, raw fruits and veggies are out. She'd like to know, how common is this? And based on some of the questions I'm seeing, it appears to be very common. And you have any advice for her?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Maureen. One thing I do want to say is I understand how frustrating that can be to be gaining weight after completing your treatment. I would really encourage you to be working specifically with a dietitian and an exercise physiologist on a plan that is tailored to you and your food tolerances and activity levels and your calorie needs. So I think that is very, very important. And specifically, if you have a cancer center nearby where you can meet with an oncology dietitian and an exercise physiologist, very important. We have that in our center and have had great success on weight management with that combined program. Some things that, just in general, a little bit higher protein and lower carbohydrate can sometimes help, actually, with weight control. So choosing your proteins and, of course, limiting some of the red meat and processed meats and not using the dairy because you don't tolerate it. But getting that protein early in the morning is very important for weight management. We find that most of us don't use protein in the morning, so really adding something to your breakfast, if it's an egg, if it's a creamy nut butter, something like that, to get some protein there. As far as the carbohydrates go, again, cooked vegetables can be very low in calories and usually are tolerated. They don't have to be raw, so those would be some options, combining higher protein with some of those cooked vegetables. Some of the fruits that you may include could be things that are peeled or applesauce or canned without sugar and those types of things. Of course, I would encourage you to eliminate empty nutrient and empty and very high calorie things like high sugar foods and sugar sweetened beverages. And I really encourage you to change your perspective a little bit or invite yourself to think about my first goal being not gaining any weight. Oftentimes when we look at cancer survivorship, knowing that some of the medications, either for the cancer or other medical issues or just with aging or our metabolism slows down, we are just focused on weight loss, loss, loss. But first, let's put a halt on the gain and consider that a success. And again, I really encourage you to work with a specific meal plan and exercise plan.
Alrighty, and a follow-up question, very similar, is Frida has problems with certain foods that she never used to have before. For example, apples. She's getting strong stomach cramps that eventually makes her sick. Any thoughts on why this is, why the cramping occurs, and why folks can't tolerate those things?
So again, some of that, if you had a surgery, that may be affecting the way that you're digesting foods, maybe some residual effects from the treatment itself or other medications that you're on. Again, some things that I would suggest is, again, it depends on how you're eating apples. Apples can be very gassy in particular, so using some anti-gas products might be appropriate for you. Or if you want apples, then I would peel them and bake them or use them in applesauce and try doing it that way. If that product doesn't work with you, then using some of the other types of fruits and vegetables that are higher in soluble fiber might be of help. Some of the cramping may be the foods that you're combining with those apples. You know, are you using something with lactose that, again, could provide more cramping? Are you using some other types of grains that are providing some of that? Is gluten an issue for you? These are many things that need to be evaluated, and maybe keeping a food log and see where the foods are that are the biggest triggers, and see if we can see a pattern with that. Might be very helpful.
Very good. We're running out of time here. We're going to try and sneak in a couple more here. Ruth Ann would like to know, what kind of meat would you suggest for smooth digestive flow into the colon and out of the stoma?
So if you're talking about meats, I would say things that most of your skin poultry is going to be easiest. Things that are leaner are going to be much better, meaning lower in fat. Red meats typically might be harder to digest, so I would be going more for the skin poultry. Some of your white fishes would be fine as protein sources from animal sources.
Okay, well, thank you. There is, can you retouch again on some of the specific foods to help with the long-term side effects of neuropathy, and also any that might improve some kidney function? This question comes to us from Deborah.
So when we're looking at neuropathy, some of the foods that might be helpful are, again, foods that do have the omega-3 fat in them. And so that would be your fattier fish, or if you can tolerate some of the plant sources like flaxseed or chia or walnuts. But typically I would say the fattier fish. Some of the B-complex vitamin foods, so those are going to be some of your grains, and some things with folate, so it might be some cooked greens or some citrus in them. Those are going to be your main food sources to help with the neuropathy. And again, perhaps the addition of the L-Glutamine powder, which is a supplement, as another way to work with the peripheral neuropathy. And as far as kidney concerns, I would really need to know a little bit more as to what you're discussing. You know, are you having kidney dysfunction, or because that would determine how much protein you would use, and fluid and potassium and sodium. So that's kind of an individual concern, I would say.
Okay. Quick question regarding shellfish from Justin. Is that in the same category as a pescatarian diet, or is it only fish?
Yes, shellfish would be included in that.
Very good. And Erica here would like to know, what's the best thing she can do if she's currently having a lot of problems eating and drinking a few days after chemo? Is there certain things that she can do to help tolerate the chemo treatment that she's going through?
So that's a very good question. Of course, we want you to maintain your hydration primarily after cancer treatment. So really pushing those fluids in small amounts throughout the meals, having the fluids in between your meals rather than with your meals. Focusing on foods, number one, that sound good and taste good, and number two, that might be a little bit lighter. So again, using small frequent feedings, foods that are a little bit lower in fat and higher in carbohydrate. So things like, oh, I'm going to have a piece of toast, I'm going to have some chicken noodle soup, things like that, that could be much easier to digest for those first few days. And other fluids can be things like if you want to use a popsicle or Jell-O or soups, all those would count as fluids as well.
Okay. And there was one last question I wanted to ask here, and it was had to do with what kind of suggestions do you have for cooked fruits and vegetables for folks? We really want to. This will be the last question here, and I think it's appropriate that we end with this one here because it's so common. Some of the inability to tolerate a lot of the roughages and the green leafy vegetables and those kinds of things. Do you have any suggestions for some of those, cooking the fruits and vegetables?
Yes. So again, the flavor is so delicious when you're cooking some of those fruits in particular. In our cooking class that we just had last week, we actually made a fruit compote where we had peeled pears and peeled apples and put some seasonings in there and a little bit of butter and just cooked them, and the bowl was empty at the end of the class. So again, peeling apples, peeling pears, cooking those, very, very delicious. Also, you can use if you're going to do something like in an oatmeal where you want to add even, it can be peaches. You could put those in there and cook. You could use canned peaches and do that as well. You wouldn't want to use any dried fruits because they're going to be much more gassy and hard to tolerate. But pears, peaches, apples, all very, very good for cooking.
Very good. And I want to thank everybody for all of their questions, but we've gone just a hair over, and we do have a number of questions that we weren't able to get to, but rest assured we will follow up with you and answer those questions electronically using the email that you provided when you registered. I'd like to thank Terri for her presentation this evening. We really appreciate your expertise in helping our patient community. It was awesome. Any parting information you want to share?
I just want to thank everybody for listening, and I look forward to more questions. And I really am inspired by all of you, and that's what creates my passion with working all of you. So thank you, and again, thanks, Kevin, for all you do for the organization.
Well, you're very welcome. As a reminder, everybody in attendance and those individuals who will be watching this via the recording that we're doing, you'll all receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to a short feedback service. That same email will also have a link to the video recording where you could watch this presentation. And again, a number of you have asked to get the slide deck. What we can do is send you the link to the actual webinar, and you could watch it at your convenience and fast forward to the different areas that are of interest to you. A number of you asked for Terri's contact information. Again, that will be contained in the video recording link that you will get tomorrow. But one thing we do want to ask you, though, is when you do get that survey, please take that Survey Monkey. It lets us know how we do. We really value your feedback. We want to know how we can make things better here. Before we go, some of you in attendance may have specific questions you may want to ask in a more personal one-on-one setting. If you would like to speak directly with one of our patient and family support navigators, please contact the Colon Cancer Alliance helpline, and Monday through Friday, 877-422-2032, or visit them online for a live chat at ccalliance.org. Before we go, please join us next month for our next webinar series on October 19th, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, with Dr. Jeffrey Meyerhart from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, when he presents 5FU from A to Z, what you need to know about the most common CUC treatment that is out there. We're going to be going into a lot of the side effects with this particular drug, including 5FU toxicity. Registration is now open. Please visit our website, again, at ccalliance.org, and visit the news and webinar area located in the Get Information section and register now. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a link tomorrow to this recording. If you'd like to write us, please forward your questions or comments to me, Kevin Bergeson, at kbergeson@ccalliance.org. On behalf of the entire Colon Cancer Alliance team, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I hope you found it informative and value-added. Have a good evening, and take care, everyone.